I wasn't being overworked and burned out the same way that, you typically hear people going through career changes or who are very stressed at work. It made me feel even more alone in that, like, even thinking like, oh, I shouldn't be complaining.
This is the Happen to Your Career podcast with Scott Anthony Barlow.
We help you stop doing work that doesn't fit you, figure out what does, and make it happen.
We help you define the work that is unapologetically you and then go get it.
If you feel like you were meant for more and you're ready to make a change, keep listening.
Here's Scott.
Here's Scott.
Here's Scott.
Is being bored a good enough reason to leave my job? We actually get asked this question quite often, and I'll say this first. You don't need to justify wanting to leave, whether you're burned out and overstimulated or bored and understimulated. You deserve a career that fits you. But here's the thing. This question gets me thinking. Burnout is talked about a lot. I mean, 500 million results came up when I typed burnout into Google. But the thing that's not talked about enough, and why many people feel so alone when they experience it, is how being bored and unstimulated at work can be just as draining as burnout.
I think I became very apathetic in my last job where I was at for 7 years. And that was just such a dangerous place to be. And it's just so subtle too, which makes it really hard. And so I think once I realized, like, I just was at a point where I just don't care.
That's Lisa Vu. Lisa was working in research at UCSF, and like many of you, she was bored at work. So very bored. She was feeling very siloed. She was unable to collaborate and was not receiving any feedback. She could basically do her job and no one else would know. Okay, so some people would listen to this, and because her job was so very low lift and had almost no oversight, she knew that many people would kill for her type of role, but it wasn't right for her. And so she decided to find something else. And as she began working with her coach, she realized that she needed to look outside of research, but then she found herself unable to look at anything besides what she was comfortable with. This was a really interesting phenomenon. And don't we all do some of this? We know that we don't have exposure to what else is out there, but then we go to an organization's careers page, and the first thing we look at are roles that we already know something about. It's insanity, but we just can't help ourselves. So Lisa realized this mid-career change, and she kept returning to her research comfort zone, and she somehow had to escape that. So instead of going completely rogue to a new industry and new role, she decided to look for roles within her current organization, the University of California, San Francisco, which luckily has a ton of different departments and jobs. Now, towards the end of this episode, Lisa and I walk through her ideal career profile and examine all of the must-haves she identified and how she searched for them during her job hunt. So I want you to pay attention for that. It's really interesting to connect it all back together. Lisa's now a project manager with UCSF, where she works to improve vaccine rates in her local healthcare system. So let's get into the conversation. Here's Lisa taking us back to the beginning of her career.
I graduated during the recession. And so that's sort of kind of not dictated my career path, but it was hard to get jobs. So for one, that was my first crossroads of what do I do with my life? I really didn't have a clear plan. And I think through a connection, one of my friends' friends was like, hey, I know someone who's hiring for a research assistant position. And I interviewed and I got it. And this was like 6 months after I graduated, which was actually pretty good for the time because I knew people who would take or who it took 9 to 12 months to get a job. And so I was a research assistant and then a research coordinator for a couple years. And then I had talked with a friend who got a master in public health. And so I decided to pursue that before I accepted my job and took this job in order to get more experience for it. So I went back to school. It was a really great experience, got to meet a lot of people and take a lot of great classes. And then I graduated after a couple years. And then I took a job as a project manager, working on a lot of cool projects, but it was a job that was not looking back, it was a pretty unhealthy environment. And so it was also another point of like, I suppose, graduating again. And what do I do next? And so I actually was offered two jobs. One was at the place I used to work before then, and it was very familiar. And it was kind of the same job I did before, but a little bit more money. And then the other job, which was the stressful job I ended up taking, because it paid slightly more, but I felt like, oh, I need more experience, something different. And so there's a lot of great things I learned from this job right after grad school. It forced me to get outside my comfort zone and really forced me to lead as a project manager in ways I wouldn't have before, because I would have just been wanting to have someone show me what to do, but that wasn't really the case there. And so it's just kind of, you're just thrown into it. So, which is not uncommon in places.
That is not
So,
uncommon. True story.
yeah. So, but it was just not a place that had enough support, in my opinion. And we had very high expectations for a lot of people like in my position with less experience, and so I eventually decided to look for another job. My next role was being a research lead it was a very cool, the work for this company was very cool. We did social marketing type work, especially in public health. So if you see an ad for like HIV testing or smoking cessation, it would be like plastered around the city and in other cities as well. We had clients in different departments of health in New York. And so our work would be like, that was really cool work. And I supported that with my research knowledge and skills. I was the research department, I guess. And so I was the one person. It was a very small group of people. So that was very fun and cool. Although after a couple years, I realized it was very understimulating and not challenging for me, since I was like the one person that did it. And
Yep.
I look back and consider that as like kind of my buffer position to kind of recover from a previous toxic position. So it was very easy for me. It was very comfortable. So I was like, okay, this is good. I need this to kind of recover from that previous job. But I didn't really, I think looking back, it would have been beneficial to think about. I think I thought about what I didn't like and what I would do differently, but I didn't really do the internal change type of stuff like I was doing during coaching. And so I think that led me to kind of repeat the pattern of just continuing to stay in my comfort zone in this next job where I would be at for 7 years.
Has that been a pattern for you in other places besides those two roles?
The first role I had right after undergrad, that was also a very comfortable role. And so I feel like most of my career, except for the one toxic position that was very stressful, most of my career, if you're counting the 4 roles now.
Oh, I count it.
Yeah. The 3 out of the 4 were very just low key, independent, which sounds really great, right? And so like I'm getting paid for doing, So it was just familiar and comfortable. And that's kind of what I knew.
But also simultaneously, it sounds like not the type of stimulation or challenge that really was beneficial for you. And it sounds like not necessarily the type of collaboration or involvement with other people that you were looking for as well.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, I think the people were probably it.
In what way?
Well, I will say that the really unhealthy job I had, the best part was the people. Like, we supported each other. We were all stressed out of our minds, but we were there for each other. We hung out. Not like, like I have to be best friends with people outside of work, but it was just, we had this camaraderie that I just really appreciated. And same for other workplaces that just really helped make the experience better for me. And it was something I overlooked because my most recent job that I left, that I was quite unhappy in, it did not have any of that. And so And it was something I kind of felt early on, but I ignored it because it was something that I felt was too small of a reason to move on and find another job. And I didn't think about this until later on in my career coaching, but yeah, when you're in a job, when you're working, because it's full time and it's a
Yeah.
lot of your time, you're being conditioned in one way or another. And it was like, wow, I did not realize that. And that's really what I felt was happening in my previous job, where I was not really getting interaction. I was not getting feedback about how to be better or growth or, anything like that. And so that really, I just felt conditioned to just, that was my reality. And I felt like that was normal and that was what it was supposed to be, which is, yeah, that's kind of the scary part.
At what point did you recognize? Do you remember any point in time where it caused you to then feel like, no, I have to do something about this. I have to do something different. What was that point in time for you?
I think just frustrations at work just started getting more amplified.
Yeah.
Maybe beforehand it was just an annoyance, but I was getting very frustrated and just like starting to get thoughts of like, I like don't want to be at this job, or I should start considering something else. And also just thinking about like maybe my friends and husband are tired of hearing me complain all the time. More of that. It's like, oh, I'm doing this a lot more. And so, but just I noticed how things would set me off a little bit more than it used to. Another added thing is that didn't help was, of course, the pandemic.
Just throw a pandemic on top of
throw that in
anything
there,
else. Yep, exactly.
I think I probably would have started searching sooner. And I think I was, but then the pandemic happened, looking for another job or another career path or whatever. And at that time, it was very hard to think about like, well, I have my very secure job right now. And so where I thankfully don't need to use too much of my brain, or that's what it felt like. So, and it was helpful at the time, at the beginning, with all that was going on, that I didn't need to have to be checked in as much and still be on top of my job.
Yeah.
But after a while, yeah, I think what really kept me in my role was that this kind of narrative or thoughts of I have it pretty good now. And like, people would kill for a role where you didn't have to do a ton and got little oversight, and I kind of got to do whatever I wanted as long as I got the job done.
Yeah. So for you, the couple elements that were really great, like having that ability to act pretty independent, pretty flexibly, had a lot of autonomy, and just deliver the results. The thought of giving that up, if you will, kind of overshadowed and kept you in that role for, it sounds like, longer than you wanted to be.
Yeah, that plus the fear of entering a very toxic environment like I had done in the past.
Yeah.
Especially as I was hearing about a lot of people I knew who were in those types of environments themselves, especially during the pandemic where jobs were cut and people had to take on, 2 roles without getting compensated for it.
Yeah.
Or just so it would just made me more scared. I think my anxiety just got especially heightened with the pandemic, and that just translated to being anxious about moving outside of my comfort zone for work also.
Okay, let's talk about that then. So when you finally made the decision, hey, look, I'm doing this. I'm in one way or another, I'm going full in and I'm going to make this change. What did you do at that point? What did you try at that point? What did the beginning stages of making a change look like for you?
It was really listening to a few different career change podcasts, including yours, because I'd never heard like testimonials or people's stories like that sounded like mine, which was very eye-opening for me because I just felt like I felt alone because I wasn't being overworked and burned out the same way that we typically hear people going through career changes or who are very stressed at work, it made me feel even more alone in that, even thinking like, oh, I shouldn't be complaining. Of course, that's looking back now, that was just not helpful at all. I was just kind of kicking myself while I was down. But yeah, it was very eye-opening to hear the stories. And then I think with your podcast, you're the only one that has actual client interviews. And so that was especially helpful to hear different varieties of stories. So even if it wasn't exactly the same, there were many components that really resonated with me.
Well, I appreciate that immensely. And the other question that I have for you too is, when you think about this process, what was the hardest part or most uncomfortable part for you through the process of career change?
I don't know if I can pick a singular one, but
let's go for a few then.
Yeah. At the beginning, it was a little bit hard because I didn't know anyone else who had done career coaching, and especially the investment involved. It's like, oh, the thoughts of like, I don't know, I have to pay money to make it do stuff I could be doing on my own. But then eventually got to a point where it doesn't matter. I'm admitting to myself, I need some help with this. And that's something I've always struggled with, is reaching out for help. And so this is where I'm, at least the one thing, I didn't know what I was going to look like. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. But the one thing I was trying to tell myself is like, this is your chance to reach out for some help.
Yeah. So people who have that same tendency to think, oh, I should do this on my own. I should make a career change on my own. I should mow my lawn on my own. I don't know, pick the thing in here. But we're talking particularly about pursuing an intentional career, which strangely we all know this isn't really something like we're taught in college or anything else, but we all sort of think that we should do this on our own. So what advice would you give that person who's going through a bit of that, I need to do this on my own?
I mean, it's worth it to look outside of yourself, even if it's not involving another human being coaching you, like looking whether that looks like resources or learning some more. Because I just don't feel like we're meant to take on something so big like this by ourselves. And it's just too much for one person, not to mention that there's just so much, we've kind of been programmed or ingrained about what the job hunting process is. It's, unless you've made lots of different changes to your approach over your career, if you're going to be doing the same thing, and especially doing it by yourself, you're probably not going to yield many changes. So yeah, I definitely highly advise people. And I get, for some things, there's an investment component, and that's totally understandable. But it's so worth looking, at least getting an additional perspective or just learning something that you don't know already about approaching career change. I highly advise it. Yeah. You're not weak. You're not like, I just don't know where that came from, where you have to do something yourself. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's this culture of independence that it's like something about like, you should be able to do this on your own, but even if you could, you don't get that outside perspective, because there's such a huge world of different careers and career types and all these aspects that go into a career. Like, how are you going to do that on your own, whether it's doing what you know already and whatnot?
Yeah. So this is one thing that I wanted to just ask you about. You've mentioned it a couple of times, just about getting outside your comfort zone. And when you initially got into your ICP, being an ideal career profile, which behind the scenes, that's a simple tool that we use in order to begin to build what we call our ideals and minimums, or rather a checklist of what you might need for your next career change. Anyhow, so you came up with some of those hypothesis that
More than one.
more than one hypothesis that you wanted to explore. And I wanted to ask you first about after you got past that stage and got into reach outs? That seemed to be an area that was very outside your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
What made it outside your comfort zone, and what helped with that?
I think it was, so what my struggle was I would just get ahead of myself when I'm thinking about who to reach out to. It was easy for me to reach out to my friends
Yeah.
who were in the career path I was exploring, but I needed to reach out to beyond that. And so that's where I got kind of in my head, like thinking ahead, trying to predict, like, oh, they're going to think this and that. And is that really, I was just kind of getting in my own way versus just doing it. And so I think what really clicked for me to do it was like, this is just experimenting. And I started thinking kind of like a researcher. So you're testing hypotheses, like you said, and there's no outcome you're aiming towards, like in research. I mean, of course you might have things that you might be leaning towards happening, but you don't let that affect that's a bias, let that affect your outcome. What your outcome is, your outcome, and that's what it is, and it's not right or wrong, and so I don't know, something just clicked where I just got into a research mind and was like, this is, if it ends up being something that doesn't work, then it doesn't work, and that's where I find out. And I know that's what's been in your boot camp, and that's what's been practice with the method and coaching, but it just didn't click until kind of then. And then that's where I started just firing off some messages, like on LinkedIn even. I was a little nervous about that. I'm like, I hadn't really done a cold message on LinkedIn before. And I think emailing people within my academic institution, because it's really big. And then, of course, as predicted, or as said, the actual interactions were pretty good. People were very willing to talk. And I think looking back, that was what I was a little nervous about. Like, am I bothering them? But most people were really willing to talk. And I would say it was the practice of doing that led me to my job rather than the connections. But also what I learned along the way helped too. It helped for me to strike out anything like, oh, okay, maybe I don't want to do this. Yeah.
What's an example of something along the way where it came up and you're like, yeah, this isn't right for me? But obviously it sounds like now you look at that as great feedback. But what's an example of a time where that happened?
Oh, there's a role I was looking into. It was like a protocol manager. One of the things I uncovered or was trying to during my whole process was, what do I like to do? So I was like, I actually like to write up protocols, which is as nerdy as that sounds, but it's just like, I just like doing stuff like that and writing things or making resources for people on informing them how to do things or understand something better. So there was a role specifically for that. But then after I talked to a couple people, I learned that role, at least at my institution, has been transformed to something that's more supervisory, which I didn't really want, at least not more than a couple people. And this would be part of my job. And I didn't want that. So I was like, okay, maybe not that.
That's amazing. That's really cool, because it sounds like you initially thought, hey, this could be something that is great for me. It seems to fit at a face level. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then as you got deeper in, as you had some of those conversations, it sounded like then you started getting indications that, nope, this is, yes, maybe that stuff is there, but also included is a whole bunch of other things that I really don't want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what drew me to it was I probably would have been a good candidate because it's familiar in certain ways. And I think I have the background for it, but
yeah.
And I was told as such from the people I talked to, but yeah, that was something that was hard to tell myself, because I think that was something I realized about myself. Whatever I'm very qualified for or seems easiest to get in a way, that's what I get drawn towards, but without really questioning whether does this fit with what I said I want.
That's really amazing, because you, one, recognize that about yourself, which is huge just on its own. but also you were able to can stop pursuing this particular opportunity. And so I'm curious, what caused you to be able to say, no, this is just not for me, when every time in the past you would have been like, yeah, I should keep going.
I think the ICP and all the work I've been doing and really the investment,
Yeah.
I was just like, I want to make sure it's very aligned and not just take the easy way out. So I think knowing that, well, especially the parts I didn't like about the role, as tempted as I was to kind of ignore it, I knew I just wouldn't have liked it, or that was just an aspect that I wanted to listen to that. And also because I'd been in my role, the role I was in while I was looking for a job for so long, I wanted it to be very as aligned as I could be. Not necessarily like a perfect job, but just aligned in the ways I wanted it to be. So I didn't want to leave my role for just the next thing.
When you say that it was partially the ICP, what about the ideal career profile helped in that situation?
Just all the areas, the aspects of the career that I had listed out that I'm trying to remember what they all are, but that I wanted.
Here, I have an example
career.
of one minimum here, and this comes from Megan on our team, who you got to work with. Yeah, she said, having at least one other person who understands my job role and I can go to with questions. That'd be an example of your minimum.
Yeah.
So you must have that at all costs. But then your ideal looked like having more than that, having at least 3 people who understand my job role and I can collaborate with.
Yeah, because in my past roles, I was the only one that knew what I knew. I mean, I am like that to an extent, but at least where I work now, there's at least another project manager who may work on different projects, but she has the knowledge of being one already at where I work, and I can go to her. And that's what I wanted, and didn't have before. It was very lonely in past roles to really feel like I didn't have anyone to go to. I'm sure if I really put more energy into it, I could have found something, but like kind of talking about conditioning before, I felt conditioned in a way that I couldn't really depend on my environment to help me out.
So let's talk about that, because one of the things that I think you did very well, and I know Megan agrees, was making some mindset shifts. And one in particular, and was realizing that you could trust yourself after you had some of those past experiences, past roles that had constantly made you doubt yourself. So I'm curious, what did that look like for you? What did that mindset shift or some of the mindset shifts look like? And how did those help?
I would say one of the first ones was when her and I were thinking of different paths to explore.
Yeah.
And this was one of the reasons I signed up for the coaching, because I was like, I literally don't know what to put in my search engine, like other than what I know. So a little part of it was like, what do I put in there? I mean, it's more than that, but she asked me, let's think of 4 or 5 different paths or jobs or whatever that you'd want to explore. And I came up with 2 or 3, and it was hard for me to come up with the rest because I was just in my head about what I could or quote unquote was allowed to pursue. And so her encouragement of kind of just thinking outside it, even if there was like just no chance of me, being, I don't know. See, that's me kind of channeling the voice I had back then, I only wanted to explore it if I knew there was a chance of being good at it or having some success with it or some degree of success. But coming up with those things to put in a search engine or ideas of pathways to explore, I think that was a big mindset shift. Because one of the things I was interested in exploring was just the field of human-centered design, user experience, a lot of different words for it, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
And even like the word design kind of was limiting to me at the time, because I was like, I'm not a designer, or just the way I thought about it.
I could never be a designer.
Yeah.
Like that
but
whole
then,
time.
yeah, but that was with without me even exploring it,
Yeah.
And so I've talked to a lot of people who are in the field, like friends and otherwise, and learned that it was a very good fit for what my interests were and my skills. And the cool thing about human-centered design is it's not so exclusive, where maybe certain roles are, but I feel like just like public health, a lot of different a lot of different fields can go alongside it or
Sure.
utilize it. So
Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting. So what I hear you saying is that initially, the way that you were thinking about even paths to explore, you found yourself kind of qualifying those or not allowing you to explore. And so, yeah, you were trying to come up with, use the example, like trying to come up with 4 or 5 different paths, but you could only come up with 2 or 3 because you were editing out all the rest of those that actually could have been a good fit. And then, so that's fascinating. What advice would you give to someone else who finds themselves doing the same thing? Because I think that's pretty common. It's pretty common for us to say, oh, I could never do that. Or, oh, but that's only for people, insert. Yeah. What advice would you give to people who are thinking that?
I mean, I think this is something along the lines of what Megan told me, but just give yourself permission to just explore. I'm trying to remember how she said it, but just exploring really without an outcome. And that's hard, I will say that, but to just not think of the outcome, which the end goal is to get a job, right? But once I started not thinking about getting a job, then it became a lot more exploratory, more creative, and it kind of got me a little bit more in touch with just the creative side of my brain too in this process, just like how important that is. And I just never use it in terms of my work and stuff, and just allowing yourself to not be attached to, which is hard because when I was exploring, I would still automatically go to the careers page of a company and see what roles they have. And then I would do the qualifying thing like, oh, this would be good. But I will say for me, it took a while to break out of that. So
it's that conditioning, right?
Yeah. So I started with, how about we don't look at the careers tab or
stay away from careers tab at all costs.
Yeah. So, and then eventually when I let myself look at the careers tab again, let's not look for roles that are exactly what you do already, or, let's open, or even just opening roles that were completely different than what I was used to was even that little thing was kind of a big thing for me, to just let myself look at something, like literally just look at it. I'm not committing to it,
I will tell you, in 10 years, I have never heard anybody talk about that one piece of it the same way that you just did. Like we want to change. We recognize that we don't have exposure to other, types of roles, jobs, needs, professions, all the things. And yet when we go to a careers page, we will only allow ourselves to look at what we've already done or what we're already familiar with. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
But it happens a lot, all the time.
Yeah. Megan even said, don't look at research positions, and I did anyways. So it was just part of it was just to get out of my system. Like, I have this urge, I just got to do it.
But just have to, okay?
Yeah. So it's just kind of wild to like kind of uncover that about me and what I'm just so used to leaning towards.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And great job too, recognizing that. I think Megan had said this, but I'm getting the degree of which your self-awareness extends. And that's pretty cool, because you can't really make the type of change that you did without having a prerequisite level of self-awareness. Otherwise it's really, really difficult, nearly impossible to be able to do. And it's already hard enough as it is.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty great to hear. And yeah, I look back and I'm like, wow, I'm glad I was able to catch that.
Tell me a little bit about what was on your ICP that you remember, that you recall, or what are the pieces that you had identified that you wanted that now you feel like you have in your newest role?
I mean, the one that you pulled out as an example about having at least one other person who has at least some shared knowledge of my role, that was pretty helpful. Just being in, I don't know how to, I think I put something like people I would want to go to lunch with or something, which, if you asked me before all this, it would have just sounded like such a small detail. But after being in roles that were just so isolating, it just became a very important thing to me. Yeah, it still feels weird to say out loud. And it's not like my top thing, but it's just something that is important also.
Yeah.
Because everything else could be great, but if I'm not interacting with people, and I'm an introvert.
You and me both.
Like it just really impacted my mental health to not get the interaction, even those little interactions with people. Again, I don't feel like I have to be best friends with people at work, and I definitely feel like there has to be, I have my boundaries and stuff, but just having those little interactions especially of support and things like that, they're very important.
I think one of the things that stood out to me was you had a lot of your strengths feed into collaboration. And I know you've mentioned collaboration a couple of times, but it sounded like that was pretty important. And even though you're an introvert, even though you can do analytical really well and you can do research really well, being isolated, obviously not a great thing for you, but more so having the right type of collaboration is amazing for you. That creates a much, much better situation. And it sounds like the right people to collaborate with as well, the people that you could go to lunch with.
Yeah, people who care to check in and things like that, which again, it doesn't sound like much, but it's just like when you don't have that, it can really impact you.
Yeah. What else have we not covered here that you would want people to know, either about your process or about anything else that we haven't covered?
I think we hit a lot of major points. I will say that, and this is what I've been telling people, like one of my biggest takeaways of what I learned about myself and through this process, or what wasn't covered anyways, was that like, I think I became very apathetic in my last job where I was at for 7 years. And that was just such a dangerous place to be. And it's just so subtle too, which makes it really hard. And so I think once I realized I just was at a point where I just don't care. That just really, or maybe I don't care as much as I want to.
The apathy creeps in.
It creeps in, and it really impacted my mental health, impacted other parts of my life where I don't know how to fully explain, but yeah. So I would say if anyone ever gets to that point, there's a lot of important things about a job like finances and benefits. Yes, I understand that. But after considering all that, it kind of doesn't matter what other aspects of your job may seem good if you kind of don't care anymore. So I would say at the very least, it's a sign to kind of reflect on that, or reflect what might be behind it. So if I were to ever feel that again, then I know now it's a sign to look into it more.
Hey, if you love this story where we talk through and walk you through step by step how someone got to more meaningful work, then you'll absolutely love our audiobook, Happen to Your Career, An Unconventional Approach to Career Change and Meaningful Work. I even got to narrate it, which was so fun, and it's something that I really enjoy doing and will definitely do for future books as well. But it also contains firsthand accounts from career changers on how they made the move to more meaningful work, just like we include on the podcast here. And actually, it's been called the best audiobook experience ever by some reviewers. You can find those reviews and the book itself on Audible, Amazon, or any other place where books are sold. Seriously, just pause this right now and go over to Amazon or Audible or wherever you want and download it. You can be reading it and start it on your career change in literally seconds. Now, here's a sneak peek into what's coming up next week, right here on Happen to Your Career.
Do you even want to be at this place, or is this just a job for you? And if it's just a job, that's fine, but you're probably going to want a new one relatively quickly.
When you're making a career transition, how will you recognize what is actually a great fit for you? We get many questions from happeners all over the world, which we love, but I've never actually had anyone ask me that question. And in many ways, it is the question. The simple answer is, well, unless you've done some certain work, you probably won't. We've had so many clients that have had the same story over and over again. They take many months to define what they want. They experiment to validate that that's actually what they want in the real world. And then miraculously, it seems to appear out of nowhere. Here's what actually happens. The opportunities were there the whole time. But if you don't know what to look for, the same opportunity that might already be there just passes you by, like two ships in the night. And you never realize that it was so close to you.
All that and plenty more next week right here on Happen to Your Career. Make sure that you don't miss it. And if you haven't already, click subscribe on your podcast player so that you can download this podcast in your sleep and you get it automatically, even the bonus episodes every single week, sometimes multiple times a week. Until next week, adios. I'm out.